In Zen, we like to have a talk come from our life experience. And so that's why when, my experience, when you go to a Zen center, people, you don't really get to hear what's going to be the topic, because it's, it's your life and the speaker, the teacher's life meets in the moment. So we're, again, in Zen, we're encouraged as a teacher to see what comes up. So it was a big retreat because it was online, of course. And that was great. And however, instead of individual interviews, we had group interviews. And it was a convert Buddhist place, just like EBMC is, really. And this is a non-EBMC place. And so there were 8 of us in my small group for PD. And guess who was the first person to speak? You already know, right? A white man. Probably a tall white man. So I was surprised that what I thought was a one-on-one PD was a group one. And I wasn't annoyed, I was just surprised. And by the way, this is a 7-day, so I was in the 3rd day, so I was already settled. And so I will say, the question the person was going to ask went on, and it was very much like, how some people, I have a question and then they're really just, telling you their point of view. They're splaining, right? Mansplaining. And I will say that the facilitator tried to say what's happening with that in the moment, right? Because that's what you're supposed to do in a retreat. You're talking about what's coming up in your practice, not some theory. I mean, you can ask for clarification about some of the teaching or something, but it's not really supposed to be like, what is emptiness, or, So I stayed with it. And remember, the 8 of us is 50 minutes PD. 15 minutes later, this person is still speaking. And I will say that in the square, people were doing this, even though we're all, we're just really trying to stay. And so I got to myself, I wrote to the facilitator, and I said in the chat, and I said, I'm sorry, this is taking up too much space / noise for me. And I bowed, and then I left. Right? And I will admit, even though I was really settled, I spent a couple of periods of meditation thinking about it, right? And then as part of this was an insight retreat I went to, as part of the insight retreat method, is that you often, when you think a lot about something, you say, well, what's behind the thinking? What's behind that thinking? And the sense I got was that when I asked myself that, what came up was, right, I'm done with accommodating. I don't have to accommodate. Right? And I was really thinking, I remember I've been in the Bay Area meditation scene for a long time, and was one of the founders of the Buddhist of Color, which was in 1998 only one of 3 people of color groups in the area. Now there's many choices. The Women of Color, led by Dr. Marlene Jones and Margarita Lournes, which is the first one I was with. And then the People of Color group, led by Ilda Gutierrez Baldequin at Zen Center, right? Which she asked me, how often do you think we should do it? And I said, every week, because I was looking for a place. And often it was just her and me in room 10 at City Center. And then she actually is the one who invited Larry to start the place at the LGBT Center when it first opened on the street. from Zen Center. Anyways, how did I get on that? This also happens after retreat. Your mind is so vast, you have to find anchors. Accommodating. So my sense is a lot of time in these big convert places, that there's a sense that, like the POC group would be an accommodation group. The LGBTQ group would be an accommodation group. A women's group would be an accommodation, right? And so I heard myself say, I'm done with accommodating white patriarchy supremacy. I'm done. Like, why should I accommodate this guy? And I really felt like, the group of 8 people, there are two men, and the facilitator is a male, but the rest of us were women. And maybe it's just me, and that's who I look at. But I know, it seemed to me like the women were the one, like, and so like I'm done with accommodating. And then I was thinking, fucking, in the United States right now, it really feels like white people for the last 4 years have been emboldened to be that much more racist. Not that they weren't before, just to be very overt about it. And so I thought, fuck, as a person of color, I should be emboldened to not accommodate fucking white patriarchal supremacy anymore, right? And then, I'm in a retreat, of course, right? So I'm going, oh, but I'm supposed to be open. And, we're also in the retreat time in which the mindfulness is not so much about even observing, but you start to relax and include everything. So I was like, I'm supposed to be including, so I had a little guilt come up. Should I have been nicer to this guy and just sat through however long it was going to take? And, I give credit to the facilitator to try, So then I was like, so then the image that came up, which is the kind of thinking when you're meditating, is, like turn the other cheek, which is very Christian, but, I believe it's been a long time since been in a church, but Jesus taught, right? Turn the other cheek. When someone slaps you, right? You turn the other cheek. Who can say if that's some sense if that's part of the teaching, right? Okay. Of course, then the image that comes up to me is, of course, like, and then I'm just thinking, wow, my cheeks are getting bruised here, right? And so this has become fucking violence. This is violence. This is not a microaggression that a white man would just keep on taking up the space. It isn't. I personally hate the word microaggression because they're not micro. And many micro make a macro, for one thing. So, so to me, we are talking about violence now, and I do not have to accommodate violence. I don't think that's part of my practice. I don't think that is part of Buddhist practice. And in fact, the premise of Buddhist practice is non-harming, which of course doesn't mean that in the world there isn't harm, right? Or that my wish that white people would just get it will make it so, because obviously it's not true. And so tonight, I could, of course, just spend the whole time going on and on about this, but I'm not going to, because it did bring up this sense that I've been thinking about. So my whole life lately has been very much focused around the Four Noble Truths. And classically, the Four Noble Truths are, in life there is suffering. Who wants to say what the second is? There's a cause of suffering. The third is there's an end to suffering. These are the traditional classic way of putting it. And then the fourth is the Eightfold Path. Or more older Buddhism is just practice in general. It's the fourth noble truth. Now, I've been thinking of them a lot as what I call the engage Four Noble Truths. Because to me, the first one is actually the hardest. And by that, it's not just, of course, classically, we talk about it teaching as dukkha, right? Which also translates as dis-ease, dissatisfaction, discontent. And it's true that a lot of it is that we're always, in general, we're taught to turn away from it, right? Or to grasp at it, but find some way not to feel it as it is, without a doubt. And so, to me, I want to say that in the engaged version, hurt and harm and dukkha is here. Just like not that it isn't true that in life, but it has happened. We start out at what happens, how can we use, this is how that becomes more engaged to me, not only in terms of systemic, which where I'm going to get into a little bit with the others to source that out bit, but really the sense of what do I do? What happens now? How do they support me when I have experienced hurt and harm? Hurt because of the impact of racism, harm because the structure of racism is harmful, and white privilege, white supremacy, white entitlement in this case, right? So the second then, right? So in particular around race, it would be how do I experience hurt or harm due to racial conditioning and to structural racism. Second is, so while it's true that often you hear what are the causes and conditions for the arising of dukkha, right? And I want to emphasize the conditions. By that, to me, it gives it much more structural. Right? What are the policies? What are the laws, right, that have brought about racial injustice? And how have we learned that, or how have systems such as family systems or cultural systems or political systems or all sorts of systems have taught us or have forced us or have told us this is how we should be. And then the third is, right, the ending, instead of just the ending of suffering, right, or there's an end to it, I want to know more. What is that ending? And so to me, and I will say I'm built off Thich Nhat Hanh, sometimes you can find that he says that the third noble truth is healing is possible. So my sense is much more restoration. How can there be restoration here? How can I have a sense both? So the restoration is also personal, and I like to frame it as agency. Where do I have agency here? And then where does the system, in the systems, is there agency that not just I, but we can do together, or political parties or NGOs or whatever can do together, right? Where can we all work together or have some sense that there's something here we can do to meet the suffering and to care for how we suffer and to work towards ending it without a doubt. And then the fourth is the Eightfold Path. Now, I will say that there's a whole course, which I'll name at the end, in which you can do this. And we talk much more about the Eightfold Path in particular. But tonight, what I have been thinking about is how does the Four Brahma-viharas can be a support to us, as in particular in this case, as people of color. And how do they work with the Four Noble Truths? And this is a working theory that each of those, so the Four Brahma-vihara, most of you know, is metta, right? Or Maitri is a Sanskrit, right? Is loving kindness or kindness, right? Goodwill, unconditional friendliness. There's only four. Second is Karuna, compassion, the wish to alleviate suffering. Third is mudita, usually translated as sympathetic or empathetic or sometimes altruistic joy. I like to say inclusive joy myself. And then the fourth is upekkha or peksha, which is usually translated as equanimity. These days I like to say resilience as part of that. So how do these four qualities work with the Four Noble Truths? So on the first, right? So harm and harming happens in life. We acknowledge, right? What are the conditioning? There's racial conditioning that have taught me that I should put up with a white man taking up a lot of space. That's why it took me a while before I allowed myself to leave. And then it took a couple periods to I found myself, I'm trying to justify it. Right? Even if I knew that was the caretaking thing to do and that I don't have to put up with it. But when I could listen to it, not just to the words, but I had a hard time believing myself. And that's because, of course, of the system of internalize, right? We've internalized how we think we're supposed to behave. And it's not just because I've internalized it, it's because there are fucking consequences when we haven't. We've been imprisoned, we've been literally hurt and harmed, killed. We've been ostracized, we've been laughed at, we've been ignored, we've been invisibilized. Right? So it's not out of, sometimes it's not just a purely something I'm doing. It's learned behavior from the system of oppression, which continues, right? So it's for me as a person of color, that's what I'm going to talk about tonight, obviously. And as a woman, as a queer person, as an immigrant, I could go on, right? Kindness, metta, a sense of being with myself in a kind way. I think this is why metta has become so powerful, right? Most of you probably, of the Four Brahmas, know most about metta. And it's taught a lot in the Insight community because it's a place where I like to think of metta as going there, right? It's really soothing. And those are the words I gave you. May I be well. Right? And your meditation, I have intention behind most things I do, right? May I be well. May I know peace and ease. Right? May I know happiness. May I know kindness. Right? So it's So I think when we are experiencing harm to us because of racism or patriarchy, we want to care and be kind to ourselves. And it was remembering that, this is a kindness I'm doing to myself to not keep myself in that situation. That was the thing that settled me. Not the, oh yeah, it's my right. Not that that's wrong, mind you, but not the this is white supremacy. Again, not that those facts aren't correct, but for me, maybe I don't know, maybe it's not true for you. This is a proposal I'm saying that for me, finally going, oh, this is a kindness I'm doing for myself because this retreat is too important for me to do the social thing of putting up to the white man taking up a lot of space. So that's what I think metta helps us right there. Now, don't forget that in the Brahma Viharas, they're considered antidotes, by the way, the Four Brahma Viharas, right? The antidote. And the antidote, metta is considered the antidote to ill will or to hatred. The antidote to hatred is metta. So it does work really well, I think. is to care for the wound, so to speak, care for the hurt that I'm experiencing. This is the first step. When there's harm, you care for the hurt, you care for the wound. So that's right. So again, the phrases are restorative. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I know peace and ease. May I know happiness all the days of my life. And of course, we give that to others. I'm not going to talk about that so much tonight. Now, second, engage noble truth is that we understand what brings about the conditions for this harming, hurtful, or harmful experience or situation. So on one level, of course, that means the conditions as in the political, as in the structural, again, with family and culture and all that. And that it was learned and taught to us. It was forced on us in in the system, it was forced on us. Sometimes in seemingly minor ways and sometimes in not minor ways. Right? And also, to me, Karuna, or compassion. Let me go ahead and say the phrases. May I know an alleviation of pain and sorrow whenever I need it. These are a little bit off the classic. May I be able to attend to pain with care and gentleness. Alleviation of pain and sorrow is so too long for your meditation. So I said care. I said gentleness. Let me be able to access forgiveness for mistakes made. Let me be patient with myself and others. May I know that inner and outer safety is possible here and now. And may I be free from suffering and the causes of suffering all the days of my life. Actually, let me go ahead and put them in the chat as I do. And I'm calling them now restorative phrases. So here's metta first. Oops. And then here are the Karuna. Did I do it right? Oh, I had to push enter. All right. So for me, compassion is the wish to alleviate suffering. That's what it means in Buddhism, right? For yourself and for others. And so the impact, right, of racism is that how is it that we can alleviate? What are the conditions? And so I think Karuna is really useful because it is very much about not just attending and being kind to it, but really how can we clean out the wound even more, right? That it's considered the antidote to cruelty and contempt. The antidote to cruelty and contempt. Not just ill will, right? Not just to hatred, but intentional or sometimes intentional, right? But really, what's the word I'm looking for? Serious, for lack of a better word. Serious, right? For ongoing, for oppressive system. And a system doesn't happen. It's up with lots of time and effort. And there may be a sense of, oh, I didn't mean to, but there's a colluding that could happen. And so for me, compassion is not just that I tend to my wound, but I also need to figure out the roots of the wound. Okay? And so both, I will say in practice, as in meditative practice, as in meditative practices we do, it is very much an internal, right? You can't make someone meditate, right? Trust me, I've tried as a teacher. No, not really, but you can't make someone meditate. But as meditators, it is very much, for the most part, a very individualistic practice, right? Which has the philosophy is that it's not just for me, especially in the Mahayana sects, right? It's very much that this is for the purpose of others. So that when I see how hatred works in me, right, how it eats away at me, or how my sense of judgment or my sense of self-judgment in this case, right, really festers, or the anger I have, right? Not that it isn't true that I shouldn't have anger about being fucking that, microaggression is not really microaggression, and that this is violence. Not that that's wrong. It's just much more in the moment, especially in a retreat. You can see that guy is, I don't know what his meditation's on, but I'm sure he wasn't meditating thinking, oh, I'm a white supremacist and I've just acted violently, right? And so the impact is on me. So how do I, care for that root so that I can put it down, that pain, that wound, so that it's healing, right? What might be some roots in me that is strong enough to reject or wrap around? Have you seen how a root, or I just repotted a plant for somebody, how a plant, when it should be in a bigger pot, right? When you take it out, really lots of roots, right? And so you have to work at that to loosen it up. Right? And sometimes you have to separate. So you have to be really clear how the wound is festering in you and what is it that needs tending to. Where is there a possibility to alleviate pain and sorrow? Right? How can care and gentleness be used here? Forgiveness, patience. These are difficult things. Karuna is hard. Karuna is fucking hard. Karuna idea is nice, but the practice is difficult. All these have difficulty without doubt. But patience, I'll tell you, that's one of the hardest ones for me. Right? And then to truly know safety as real and possible for us, irregardless of the conditions of the world. See, that's a lot. That's a lot. And I'll just share kind of a minor story. Well, seemingly minor, but it actually was a big deal for me. And I will say safety is a big thing for me. In fact, when I sat with Dr. Marlene Jones and Margarita Loines at the Women of Color group, we did metta, right? And I remember I had a meeting with Margarita, and she said, oh, I would like you to do metta, and I would like, because sometimes the phrase she gave me is, you have inner and outer safety. So safety sometimes shows up in metta and sometimes shows up in karuna, but for sure it's in karuna. Just some version it is also in metta. And I like to put in metta sometimes, but more classically it is a karuna, a compassion phrase. And she said, you need safety. I want you to really know. So since 1996, I've been working with these, right? So safety's been a big issue. And for those who don't know, I'm old enough to have been in the Vietnam War. And obviously for many other reasons, given my presence, that there's a lot of safety issues. And so a while back, I live by Van Ness Street in San Francisco. And as you well know, or for those who know, who live in San Francisco in particular, they have been working on Van Ness Street for how many fucking years now, right? Right? To change Muni, right? And I have some issues at the crosswalk. It's one of my karmic residue that it always seems like a black SUV is trying to, turn and run me over at crosswalks. And so I have a thing, safety is a big issue at crosswalk, and I just walk. I don't have a car or anything, right? So So I was getting ready to cross Van Ness one day, and they were doing construction. And this woman holding this, they blocked off the sidewalk, and I was supposed to cross to the other side before I crossed Van Ness. And I'm holding a lot of dirty laundry and stuff, to cross the street to go to take to my girlfriend's car, right? So I'm just like having all this stuff, and I was like, fuck it, I'm going to cross anyways, right? So I'm going, she's like, don't walk this way, and I walk anyways, right? And then, I'm putting in my girlfriend's car, and then I have to walk back to go to my apartment, right? And so I did the same thing. I just ignored her, and I walked back, right? And then I was in therapy then, and I was doing EMDR therapy, right? And I will tell you that the thing that came up, it just came up, was I realized, oh, she is just doing her job to try to keep me safe. She was just trying to do her job to keep me safe. And it was so funny. And perhaps, by the way, she was a person of color, right? And maybe that helped, because for a moment I had the sense of, oh, there are other people in the world who are trying to keep me safe. And I'm sure it's practiced for many years. Remember, things can happen, and therapy, without a doubt. But there was this really sense that, oh, the world is a safe place. That was huge, huge, right? Like a knowing that was not like a word of a sentence, but a deep knowing that, oh, this world, my fucking world, right, as it is, there is safety. Trust me, it hasn't. Don't think that since that day I'm like, oh, safe. Trust me, if you know me at all, that's not true. And how wonderful, how healing, how restorative that in a moment I could just really know clearly there is safety, and that there are people there who are looking out for my safety. Isn't that like, this is any moment in your life, it can happen that seed that is part of this cultivation practice of the Brahma of the heart. We don't just say these fucking phrases, just this, do them right. They're like seeds that are there, and when the condition is ripe, the fucking tree will grow big and tall, right? Is it Emerson? I think this is on one of my girlfriend's tea leaf, or not tea leaf, but tea bag thing, right? I don't know what tea brand that is, but Ralph Waldo Emerson, right? The forest begins with an acorn, or something like that, right? It really is fucking true. Possible. Let's put it that way. It really is possible. Lots of oak trees in the world, right? So the third is restoration or non-harming is possible through knowing that we have responsibility. Manifesting bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is the wish for awakening, not just of yourself, but everyone, right? By knowing myself as agents of change. Through knowing or realizing conditions can change, be different, and I am and can be a part of it. It is possible to live a life dedicated to non-harming and the promotion of peace. That's my take on what the third noble truth is. A little bit of a mouthful, right? Maybe a simpler way would be, how and where can I be an agent of change? How can I empower myself? How can I empower and uplift others? How can we acknowledge first noble truths and understand more or fuller context and condition which brought about this experience or situation into fruition? Second noble truth. Clarify for how and where best to be with, meet, and act and or change, decrease, eliminate harm or dukkha as agents of change. That's the third, right? How can we redirect our conditioning to reduce or end the impact of our reactive patterns? Right? Don't tell me what to do. That's a reactive pattern I've learned from being forced to do shit I don't want to do and being told it's for my own good, when in fact it really isn't. Fucking hurts being slapped, right? Fucking hurts. All these fucking excuse me, here I go. For those who don't know, when I realized that when I was 19 and I had long hair and I was so quiet, I went off to college, right? And I realized, I swore like once in a group. And people were like, you swear? And I was like, fucking right, I do. But then I realized, I was like the epitome of the model minority. I was so afraid to speak up and stuff. And so from then I was taking ethnic studies and I was like, I'm not that. And that's when I started swearing, and now it happens. So that's also a reactive pattern that I come up with. One that's a little hard to let go. It just means passionate at this point. So how do we work with reactive patterns that impacts us inside? And how does those reactive patterns hinder versus support change in the world? As agents of change, we need to know skillful, appropriate, useful ways. And by that, I don't mean there's just one or two out there. It just means that this has to be part of our wish to leave, our wanting healing and restoration, right? That we're there to work on how, listen to work with others, listen to ourselves, be willing to change, be open. Right? How can we have non-suffering? How to foster and be grounded in our innate, non-harming, and interconnected nature? So in the Brahma of the heart, inclusive joy. It's the inclusive joy is the antidote for envy and jealousy. There was a part of me that was like, fucking white men. I envy that they can just take up space, right? I do. I just envy. Like, a part of me, I did actually. If who is it that usually can do that? If the Buddha came to me and said, "Oh, I can make you a white man," and that could reduce your suffering, I would say, "No, thank you. Really, I would. I don't want that." But occasionally, I have the envy, right? You think, it'd be so free, but obviously it's true. There's a big, tall white man in the White House, and he's obviously not happy, right? Really not a happy person. So that's the antidote. So the fourth, the Eightfold Path is restorative by providing instructions and practices to develop skillful ways to not harm and to rectify harm we've experienced or done to ourselves or to others, right? So that comes with equanimity. Here are the phrases. I am the nature of flexibility as I meet the comings and goings of my life. Joys and sorrows are a natural part of my life, and I am open and able to receive. Let clarity of heart and mind support me to meet conditions of my life as they are. May I know and show true equality all the days of my life. Let me go ahead and I forgot to, and I won't say them now. Do I even have them at this part of the talk? No, that's why. Let me go ahead and give you my joy phrases, and then I'll do the equanimity here. And then I'm going to close this up. I'm aware of the time. All right. So, it is true, my sense is we don't have, right? But I'm just going to state it. I'm done with accommodating white patriarchal supremacy. I am done. By that, I don't mean that I'm going to be angry for the rest of my life, because anger is a corrosive feeling. Right? However, on a certain level, to be truly an anti-racist, you have to be done with accommodating white supremacy. You say? You have to be done. You have to have some sense that it can't go on. It really can't. And really, by this, I don't know that, I don't mean that we don't all know it already. It just means it becomes the center of my drive, right? How is it that I can allow myself as really a self-care, not just for myself, but for all BIPOCs, right? How can that this is the driving force, that I'm done. And what are ways in which I'm going to say no more? I'm not going to put up with it, and I shouldn't have to. And then not just what can I do about it, but what can you do about it? Obviously not appropriate in a meditation retreat, right? So appropriateness is huge. So what are ways? So there are limits, I think. It is true that all the Brahma Viharas, they're there to help us expand out, right? And that they have a sense of absoluteness about it. But the absoluteness about it is not that that's the better alternative. It just means to have that sense, an absolute sense, there is safety in this world. There was an absolute sense, right? And then, of course, there's a realistic sense, right? And so how do we live holding both? This is our life. Not how is this that my realism is not true and invalid, and that I should go live in some absolute. This is not our practice. A practice is to be able to negotiate that. When the relative feels so constricting, how can we remember the absolute as a spaciousness, and then to negotiate ourselves and with each other, to remember that, to hold that, and to perhaps work with that in mind, but we don't live in the absolute. And when there's too much absolute, like too idealistic, and we're caught and we're suffering because we think it, right? It has to be this way. And then do we remember that what are the relative ways to make this happen? What are the practical, real life things that need to happen? And so how do we allow ourselves? And I would propose to you, a part of allowing is to know that you have flexibility. Of course, knowing flexibility and being able to be flexible is two different things. Actually, the thing I think about and I struggle with this too. I live in an apartment building. And okay, I'll offer a couple of things. One is the first thing I thought about is the manager or someone who should address it. So depends on your relationship with the manager. I think as a personal practice, there's of course, no right response in terms of there's no cookie cutter response. One is, I would say, what is, as you say, it is a whole lifetime that we all carry about white supremacy. And for each of us, part of this restorative thing is to see what part of it supports. So let's say anger. Right now, how do I want to work with anger? And it sounds like one is for you to be able to hold it and know it as this force that's happening. And it sounds like you're having wisdom about, wanting to have it some settledness before, just raging at them, which, doesn't make it necessarily not a good option, but generally not, because rage tends to meet rage. Defense tends to meet defense, right? So it sounds like there's wisdom in that. And so I celebrate that with you. And then the other thing I would suggest, so how do you want to care for your rage? And then how would you like to have others care for the rage? And you can do that just by doing some writing or talking with a friend about, or Sangha, or sharing it with us like you have. And then, just as just a way to have, so for me, it feels like for a lot of us as people, as BIPOCs, is that having a witness and validating our experience can be huge, especially if you live in isolated places, right? So that's something. And then I think the thing is to work with the structural stuff, is to say, where is the power lie that this can, so working with the manager. I mean, if you have some relationship with the neighbor already, of course, then you would go do it that first, right? So there's just some way. And it's always a struggle living in an apartment building, for sure. I mean, I've made up a fantasy about mine above. Seems like at 2:30 in the morning, there are always clunking sounds. So my story is they're a drag queen and they're just done. This is before the pandemic, right? And the bar is closed and their work is done and they're just home and they'd like to just throw off their shoes to be at ease. And so I actually haven't gone up, even though sometimes I play the music loud, because I actually don't want to face to put my rage on it. 13 years I've done this. So that's my practice with my upstairs neighbor. I have at one point gone up and knocked, I will say, and they didn't respond at all. And I left a note to say, this is the impact it has on me. Could you consider turning it down? Just to relate, after many years of only dating women of color, purposely, I fell in love with a white woman. Yeah. So, fucking A, life, So, and she is my life partner, without a doubt, an amazing person. And the way we work with it is she's committed to anti-racism. Doesn't mean that we haven't, by that I don't mean it's been smooth, but as much as possible. And in the past, I have been with white people who don't get it. And so one, they have to be committed or else it's not worth, to me, I have been in relationship with just like, compatibility does make a difference, folks, hugely. And our racial understanding of our location in the world makes a difference. That's a kind of compatibility. It really is. So it isn't necessarily that people of different color can't live together, but we have to have the same value, and we have to have to me, there's a sense of openness to talking about it and having the tools to talk about it. And I hate to say it because it sounds like self-promotion, but I really recommend, even though you're in New York, for both of you to sign up for my course. That's starting at the end of January, called the Dharma being anti-racist. And the reason for that is, I will say, my whole sense in the Antoinette took it. Show. I don't know who else is in the room who's taking it. Let me go ahead and put it in here. We very much talk about, I keep hitting the wrong thing, understanding our location, our racial location, and how we learned it. And we go through the Eightfold Path. That's what the course is on. I've been working with the Eightfold Path for a long time to make it a restorative process. And so it's being able to have some clarity in the language. This is the thing. You can have people who have good intention, but if you don't have similar language of talking about it, of really understanding the nuances, of course, 17-week class is not going to solve, and it will do a lot. Just like going to therapy, having a language that you can talk together helps. So this is and this is a kind of commitment then, that we're going to go and explore this together, and doing something together like that will be a big help. So my first response is basically the issue has to be able to be discussed. Bottom line, which doesn't make it easy. And so having the other thing, folks, is that I think as people of color, as any oppressed person, we often have a sense that we have to do it all ourselves. We're isolated. And, we need to reach out. We need to say that we can have support. We don't have to be isolated. And that's a huge thing towards our well-being. It isn't just because, there's a real, at this point, there's scientific research. This is why actually the pandemic has been so difficult, is that we're so isolated. But lots and lots of research. And of course, you guys are, we're reaching out in this way.